I want to continue our conversation with Senator Gregg and Bayh, member of the Banking and Energy Committees. Also, Senator Judd Gregg, member of the Banking, Budget, and Appropriations Committees, are two guest hosts today. We haven't gotten specifically to FinReg, but just quickly on the timing of all this. The Times this morning says it's a question of when, not if. You go along with that?
Yes. Yes, it's just a question of when Harry Reid can get 60 votes. Evan might have a better idea than I do, but clearly the death of Robert Byrd affects that. And there's 3 or 4 votes on our side of the aisle that there would arguably be in play, I presume. And when they line up their 60 votes, I presume they'll go.
It's actually, as used to be the old saying, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. Well, it's now as New England goes, so goes the nation. I think it's largely Olympia
Parts
snow.
of New England.
Well, maybe you can explain this.
That aren't included in that.
It's largely Scott Brown and Olympia Snow are kind of on the bubble right now.
Yeah, and Collins has already said probably, yes?
That's right.
And Grassley is the other name that's getting tossed around.
I don't think they're counting on Chuck's vote.
Interesting.
Really, but they can do it. So, yeah, we call the rhinos and, dino in some ways, although you're on board.
Soon to be extinct, Joe? Is that what you're implying here?
No,
I'm just an old fossil at this point.
Well, we had last week we could talk about Texas Democrats, Richard Fisher, who told, I think he told Steve Leisman that it's tough in the private sector because of the policies of the administration. He's a total Democrat and on board with that was the same time that Paul Krugman was writing. It has nothing to do with policies. It has to do with demand in the private sector. And if the government would instill some demand in the private sector, then you would see the corporations start hiring.
You look at what's happening coming down the pike here, and you've got the FinReg proposal, which I think is going to create a very significant contraction in credit for a variety of reasons. Derivatives are going to contract. Capital adequacy means that companies are going to lend less, banks, because they have to get their capital up. And, of course, nobody knows what the Volcker rule is going to do, so there's going to be uncertainty. And then you've got on top of that the increase in tax on capital, which is going to occur when cap gains goes up and dividend rates go up. And then on top of that, you've got the health care bill starting to implement its procedures, which is going to be expensive, including the 3.8% tax on investment income, which is a huge tax that nobody's focused on relative to Medicare tax. And all of this is coming together in the face of an economy which is quite weak over the next year to year and a half. And so if I'm in business, I'm thinking, whoa, where's the growth going to come from? Should I really put the extra investment into my manufacturing capability or into my software capability? Because if I do, I'm not sure I'm going to get the return because I'm going to have to pay for all this new cost. And it's a very dampening experience that I think has basically been put in place by the administration, which is filled with community organizers and very few people who understand markets. In fact, they don't like markets, I don't think, and they don't like capital, and they don't like profit.
Well, to get
is that too distinctive position?
I think it's very clear.
To get to your first point, Joe, in my part of the world, Democrats believe in being fiscally responsible. We understand that the private sector grows jobs and creates prosperity, and then we hope to use some of that additional prosperity to create more opportunity with investments in education and things of that nature. But first comes growth in the private sector, which gets me to my point in somewhat of a response. I agree on some of what Judd said and have some different take on some other aspects of what he said. We've just come through the largest financial panic since the 1930s. It destroyed trillions of dollars worth of wealth, millions of jobs, hundreds or thousands of businesses in the private sector. We're hammered by what we went through. Now, we truly do nothing in the face of that to prevent a reoccurrence? Of course we have to act. But as usual in Washington, we don't just act. There's a tendency to overreact. But now, where I would agree with Judd is that we needed to act, but we should have deferred some of these things that might have dampened growth, dampened investment. We got to look at that, couple $1 trillion sitting on corporate balance sheets and focus on how do we incent the private sector to put that capital to work.
Well, it shouldn't be government's job to incent that. I mean, basically, if there's $2 trillion on private balance sheets in corporations, let's let them decide how they're going to invest that, and let's let the markets make those decisions. Let's not have the government create an imbalance in the market in order to incentivize people to invest in a certain way. That's industrial policy. We really inefficient use of capital.
We can debate that. My point is, of course, we don't want government reaction that retards the recovery and investment. But at the same time, we can't allow the situation that led to this calamity to just continue.
Well, no, we shouldn't do that either. But I mean,
you got to deal with the excesses that led to this, but not go so far that you're actually doing harm to the economy.
Well, but this FinReg bill doesn't get at the essence. I mean, the essence of the problem was a real estate meltdown, which involved 2 different things. A lot of different things. But the primary things that it involved that we as a government should have addressed was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bill doesn't address that.
I voted for that.
Yeah, I know you did. And underwriting standards, so that basically you don't create an atmosphere where people go out and basically make loans for the purposes of getting the fees rather than for actually having the loan perform. And those two are not addressed in this bill. So this bill, in a lot of areas, just is counterproductive. It's the functional equivalent of trading LeBron James to China in the area of derivatives activities. I mean, basically, we're going to push offshore massive amounts of economic activity that should be occurring here. And instead of reorganizing the regulatory atmosphere, it actually just creates layers and layers of new regulatory atmosphere. The Consumer Agency being the worst example of that. So I don't think we're getting much for this bill in the way of substantive reform that hits the nail on the head.
Do you think it constrains
real
credit?
estate?
Does it constrain credit? Judd was saying it. I mean, would you vote for anything that you thought would extend the recession or constrain credit? I mean, you wouldn't vote for something you really believe.
No, I wouldn't.
So you don't believe it hurts?
And my take on this bill, a lot like the health care bill, is it's 51-49. It's not what I would do if I were just a philosopher king and had the ability to put into effect what I wanted. But unfortunately, that's not how Congress operates.
Right. It beats the alternative.
Well, yes. I do think, look, I agree with Judd about the real estate problems, Fannie and Freddie. I think, Judd, I was one of maybe 2 or 3 Democrats who actually voted to do something about that. But I get back to the point, and this is what incenses a lot of Americans, probably a lot of your viewers, this whole too big to fail move. If you want to risk your own capital, that's one thing. But if you want to get so big you're going to drag everybody else down with you by running huge risks, that's something that society as a whole has a say in. So we needed to act to deal with that. Has the reaction gone too far in respects? Yes, it has. But you got to try and strike that balance where you get the positive without so much of the negative.
Right.
Well, we
got to go. Sorry, Judge.
Congress doesn't operate that way.
Stocks to Watch is up next. Stay with us.
Cut off again.